I also spoke earlier with Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio and asked him about the threat posed by ISIS militants.
Well, certainly, potentially more dangerous today than Al-Qaeda. They're a very extremely radical group with increasing capabilities and a very clear design. They want to establish an Islamic caliphate in sections of both Syria and Iraq and other places. Potentially Jordan is next at some point. And then they want to launch attacks in the exterior, external operations, including targeting our homeland. This is an extremely serious national security risk for the country if they were to establish that safe haven of operation.
I know you have said that what is happening in Iraq has a direct bearing on the future security of every American. How so?
Well, if you look at what happened before 9/11, the reason why Al-Qaeda was able to carry out the 9/11 attacks is because they had a safe operating space in Afghanistan that the Taliban had given them. And now history is trying to repeat itself here. ISIS is trying to establish the exact same thing in the Iraq-Syria region that they're increasingly controlling. And then from there, from this caliphate that they're setting up, they will continue to recruit and train and plot and plan and eventually carry out external operations in Europe and potentially even here in the United States. So this is a very serious national security risk for the immediate and long-term future of our country.
So you believe our future involvement in Iraq is a direct threat to our national security?
Without a doubt, I think this is an urgent counterterrorism matter. I know a lot has been talked about the future of Iraq itself as a country, and that's a very legitimate issue that needs to be looked at. But for me, this is not about nation building or imposing democracy. This is a counterterrorism risk that we need to nip in the bud. It is my view that we will either deal with ISIS now or we will deal with them later. And later, they're going to be stronger and harder to reach.
So given that this is a direct threat to U.S. national security and an urgent threat, what should this administration be doing?
I do not believe, and I certainly hope, that what he's announced with the 300 additional special forces and trainers going in is not simply a symbolic measure. I hope it's the first step in a multi-step process. But I think that we need to figure out a way to cut off those supply lines from from Syria into Iraq. We may potentially even have to target their command and control structure that they've established, including in portions of Syria. In the meantime, I think this also calls for us to continue to empower those moderate rebel forces in Syria who are engaged in conflict against ISIS, not just Assad. And I think we need to provide more assistance for Jordan, both in security and in their border, because I think this poses a risk to Jordan down the road, and one that we should take very seriously.
I've been talking to a number of U.S. officials and foreign officials who say that there is a danger in launching airstrikes before a political solution is reached, essentially a new government without Prime Minister Maliki. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think that has to be balanced. You certainly want to make sure that the airstrikes don't lead to chaos that could be even worse. On the other hand, you've got to keep a close eye on the situation, because if it continues on the trends we've seen recently, there may be no reason to launch airstrikes, because at this point they've controlled the whole country. If you look at, for example, the danger Baghdad is now in, or the danger that different oil refineries are in, or their increasing ability to capture weapons that the Iraqis have. And I think if they continue to make these gains on the pace that they've been making, it's going to require urgent action to prevent them from establishing control over large sectors of this country.
So I'm just trying to clarify what you
establish the caliphate that they seek.
So what is the urgent action that you're suggesting?
Well, the urgent action is to draw plans that allow us to begin to degrade their supply lines and their ability to continue to move forward.
With airstrikes?
That border between Iraq and Syria is quite porous. And they're coming right across it. They're bringing equipment through there. They're bringing personnel through there. It's not the only border that they're utilizing, but it is a primary one. So we've got to figure out a way to isolate ISIS from Syria and Iraq, isolate them from each other. And then, look, I'd leave the rest to military tacticians.
Your colleague Rand Paul wrote in the Wall Street Journal, kind of raised the question, what would airstrikes accomplish? That in essence, we would become Iran's air force by aiding them. Your take?
Well, I don't agree with that statement. I think that's quite an exaggeration. The truth of the matter is that if we do nothing, Iran is still going to be involved. And in fact, if you think about it, imagine if Iran goes in there, becomes involved, and somehow helps the Iraqis turn back ISIS. You can rest assured that a future Iraqi government will be completely, 100% under the influence and in the pocket of Iran. They will have expanded their strategic reach to include practical control, not just over Syria, if Assad survives, but also over Iraq. increasingly positioning themselves as a hegemonic power. The United States has a different hope for Iraq's future. It belongs to them as to how they get there, but our hope is a country that includes Kurds and Sunni and Shia and even Christians, an inclusive country for its future. That is not Iran's goal here. To do nothing and allow ISIS to establish a base of operation like what Al-Qaeda had before Afghanistan places us in a very dangerous position from a counterterrorism point of view and puts Americans' lives on the line down the road.
I hear you saying that we can't do nothing, but what I'm not hearing from you is what we should be doing. Whether we should have more boots on the ground, whether we should do airstrikes immediately. I'm hearing cutting off supply lines, but what else?
I think that we should cut off ISIS's access to their command and control structure in Syria. And I think primarily that involves air power. What I don't think the president should do is unilaterally go out and announce to the world, these are the things I'm not going to do. He may in fact conclude, and I think many people would agree, that the introduction of ground troops and combat operations on the ground are not wise or necessary. I happen to share that view based on the information that I have today. But I don't necessarily think you need to go out and announce that and limit your options.
Do you think Prime Minister Maliki should step down?
That's a tough question. I mean, the question is what replaces him. I certainly don't think he's been a good prime minister. I certainly believe that many of the problems that Iraq now faces are a direct result of failure of his leadership. And I think that's the time may very well be arriving when he should step aside and allow someone else who can help unify the country to take hold there. I think if you start to extrapolate this out further, and you alluded to it in one of your earlier questions, imagine for a moment if we were able to push ISIS back, doing the combination of air power and what the Iraqis do on the ground. You still need a government that can govern and bring the country together. I don't believe Maliki can do that.
Senator Marco Rubio, good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.